Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and that is David, and we are going to talk about the Continental Episode 1. This is the new mini-series which is set in the world of John Wick from Peacock. And since it is a first episode, I think we will start with a little spoiler-free section, get a taste for it. That won't happen for the next episodes. There's no point, I don't think. But for episode 1, we'll dig in.
Well, let me question real quick for myself and the audience.
Yes.
Is that spoiler-free for the John Wick franchise as well?
That is a good question. I hadn't really given it much thought. I would say there might be some late spoilage, but I think we could probably steer away from any, big ending stuff from any of the movies. I don't think it's that. It's also, I mean, it's basically just the stuff that's in place at the start of the first movie that anything in this is going to tie into, really.
True. Yeah.
That's where it is. So yeah, David, I don't think he's been on the TV channel before. He's over on the movie channel, on the Collector's Cut, doing movie podcasts and stuff. So
hi.
Hello. Yes, welcome. And the reason why he's here for this is because we reviewed all 4 John Wick movies earlier this year, just when 4 was coming out. We sort of did the first 3 and then did 4 when it came out, and it just made sense to jump in and talk about the Continental and see how it is. This was something that was in the works for a while, and for a long time it was just as a TV show called the Continental. It wasn't until they made a lot of announcements last year or whatever where it was like, oh, this is only 3 episodes that are all 90 minutes. That was a surprise. I think we all thought, it'll be like a 10 episode, 8 episode season, and maybe there'll be a season 2 or whatever, and maybe there still could be a season 2. I don't know. We'll see how it ends, I suppose.
I think it's gonna see how many people are brought into Peacock in order to fund the next season.
Well, Peacock, I think, is one of the least successful of all the streaming platforms. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, this is set. Go on.
We just have the entirety of everyone who can't live without The Office, and that's it. That is everyone that subscribes to Peacock.
And WWE fans, because you get all that now.
That's right. I
have to imagine that's a lot of their users.
Possibly, probably. I don't know how big piracy is amongst WWE. How many people are just streaming it illegally?
I mean, given that it's a live thing and it's cheap enough, I suspect that most think it's just easier to get Peacock than bother with piracy.
Fair enough.
Which is a lot more unreliable for obvious reasons. So yeah, this is set in the 70s. It's a younger Winston, played by Colin Woodell in this case, but obviously Ian McShane in the movies. Yep. And it's about him, it's about his brother, it's about the guy who ran the Continental back in these days, which I completely forgot Mel Gibson was going to be in this, so that was a surprise when he showed up. So, very good. But there's several plot threads going on here and several characters that are introduced. Some who might turn out to be characters we know in the movies. Some who might just be dead by the end of the story, we don't know. But there are multiple plot threads. There's a cop who's kind of investigating things. There's obviously the brother itself. The brother's got a wife. There's a whole range of characters, plus some cheeky connections to the movies themselves and some of the lore. So we'll get into all of that, but I guess we'll just start off with a simple question. David, how did you feel about episode 1 of the Continental?
It's nowhere near the quality that I have come to expect from the John Wick films, but I don't think that's really fair to hold that to that standard, it being a TV show within its own right. I think that I enjoyed it for what it was setting up. I think that it did some really cool things with expanding the lore already, just based off episode 1. There are several things that they covered in this episode that I remember asking, if not during our reviews, then at least while I was watching the film, of but wait, what if this happens? And the show deals with it. So I think this is some top tier stuff for people who are interested in the sort of lore and world building that John Wick established and want more of that. And I am definitely one of those people. So I'm down for that. In regards to the story, I mean, I would say by the time we hit the end of episode 1, we're only just starting the main core of the story. So I can't give it many props on that yet.
Yeah, I felt quite mixed about this. I think it does an okay job of having John Wick-esque action fights. Twice in the episode it kind of does them, and it mostly succeeds at feeling like it's part of the same world in the way the action looks and flows. And that's commendable, because that's one of the harder things that I would suspect they'd have to pull off, and doing something connected to John Wick. I do think it's far too busy, though. I think there's too many like different protagonists and their own plot lines being introduced over the course of this episode. Sometimes it felt like we were being like we'd leave a character who's been introduced and we start their story, and then we spend the next 10-15 minutes introducing other characters, and we got to the point where we were like halfway through this episode, we're 45 minutes in, and we were still introducing new characters and new plot threads. Right. And I'm like, you know, technically this is a TV show, but really it's a little TV trilogy of movies, so it kind of bothered me that the pacing felt more like an hour-long TV show that was going to have a lot more chapters than something that actually had the momentum of what should effectively feel like a movie trilogy. So
yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at there with saying that the main plot only really kicks in at the end. It feels like this was the first act of the story, but it was stretched over an entire movie's length.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, there's an art to doing that with trilogies where the first movie should feel like the first act, but within that act, it should feel like it has its own story that feels like it's got a conclusion. And I wouldn't say that this does. I would say this feels just kind of like part one of three things, which it kind of is, but you can still make each part feel like a full meal on its own. Right. I will say I notoriously tend to not like prequels very much, and I was doing okay with this for the most part, but I will say the final 30 seconds of this episode did make me cringe very hard with the very forced reference. I hated it, and I'm going to critique it as such when we get to spoilers and talk about it.
All right. I didn't have this I say movie because it practically was. This episode is actually fairly light on those forced references. It doesn't feel like it's going out of its way to do things. Obviously, we bring in characters and locations and such like that that we are aware of from the series, but I didn't ever feel like it was one of those things where, you know, all of a sudden they walk by like a dog pound and it's like, boy, I sure do wish I could adopt a dog. Wink, wink. Like,
I tend to agree for the most part, although I will say that there was a lot of characters who I instantly recognized because they're wearing the exact same clothes they're going to be wearing in 2014, and that's a little, you know, it's a little wink wink.
Hey, I've owned this shirt since 2008, so
but that's not 40 years. Come on.
That's fair.
Right.
I'll get it there.
But like, you know, I was definitely feeling that a little bit. It's like they all have superhero uniforms that they're all wearing all the time, and they can never be in anything else. There's never any casual wear. So
that's fair.
Yeah, and visually, like, it is lacking the style of the movies. It definitely felt a lot more downbeat at times. And sometimes the CG that was being used to make it look like the 70s and the backdrops and stuff, yeah, it has kind of a fake look to it. It feels a little bit phony in places. Honestly, the biggest issue I had visually, though, was probably just Peacock's horrible compression.
Yeah, I noticed that several times while I was watching.
It looks like shit. It's one of the worst, as far as video quality goes, they have one of the worst, like, delivery system of any
the codecs
platform
or whatever.
Yeah, they're compressing it just far too much, and it was especially bad. Like, there's a big, huge opening fight scene to kind of like kick things off, and there's a lot of, it's not one big wonder, but there's a lot of like long shots within it. And as like the character's walking around, like his back and all the shadows in the corners of the screen is just nothing but like pixely macro blocking and all that shit. And I'm like, this is just ruining any sort of sense of mood and style you're trying to achieve here. Is ruined completely by these globs of pixels that are just popping up around. So I have to criticize that, which is a shame.
I'll give you that. On the flip side of that, I'm going to commend this episode's soundtrack because I don't think that they went 30 seconds without playing some banging 70s hit.
I'm off two minds on this, actually, because while the movies do have some songs here or there, like the most prominent thing I remember from those movies is that recognizable score. Now, I'm not saying that I expected to have the John Wick score sprinkled into this. It would have been an option, I suppose, but it having a score that has kind of a pulse to it is very much part of what makes those movies feel like those movies. And I do wonder the choice to basically almost only use source like soundtrack songs. You know, it's all 70s hits. It's all stuff like that, and they really lay them on thick throughout. And part of that's maybe try to convince us of the period, because it's the 70s. Look, it's all 70s songs, so they're going for that, which is fair enough, I guess. But it's kind of like they went so far with that they maybe sacrificed like having its own sound as well.
Yeah, I guess my problem with it is that I am still viewing this as basically act one of a larger movie. I guess I'm viewing this as, by the time we hit the third act, the third episode, that it is going to maybe have that happen. It is going to develop the score over time, because I just don't feel like anything in this episode really earned the moment where the score kicks in, you know?
Well, I mean, big main theme moment, sure, but like you still sort of tease it, you still build up to it, and I never really felt like there was any moments like that. Like when you watch John Wick 1, you still hear little teases of the theme coming right early on, you know, when it's building up to stuff. So there's a kind of a lack of momentum in a lot of this episode, because it is setting up so many characters around the world. It's mostly New York, but one character starts off in England, so it feels like we're globetrotting a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, we'll give a spoiler warning here so we can talk about the episode proper. So this is episode 1, Brothers in Arms. We'll get into it. So first things first. So we're introduced to Winston and brother Frankie. We see them briefly as kids, but then we jump ahead and we get a sort of taste of where they are now in the present day of the show, which is the 70s. And immediately I'm thinking, well, I don't know if I ever remember Winston mentioning a brother, so I've got a funny feeling he's not making out of this miniseries alive.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, though. John Wick was strange the way it was built, because each movie kind of just did that, where they just retconned in like, oh, wait, you didn't know about my secret family in Russia or whatever? It's like, no, they just do this. So for him to have a brother now, I could see him surviving to the end and nobody ever mentioned him. But once it got to a certain point in this episode, you're like, yeah, I don't think he's long for this world.
Yeah, the whole plot with him is that he's working at the Continental at the start, and you get the sense that he's up to something. We see that he's working for Mel Gibson's character Carmack, who runs the place. He's like he's the Winston effectively of the day, and but he's actually doing this heist where he goes down to the subway and he's planted like a hook that's attached to a vault door that he's going to bring down through a subway manhole, so that a subway train, when it hits it, it'll pull the door. Which, I mean, as far as plans go to rip off a vault door, it's relatively genius.
I mean, add on top of that, he specifically timed it for exactly midnight on New Year's Eve,
for the
so
noise,
nobody would hear it.
Yeah,
I think that's clever.
It's clever. I'm sure somewhere Mythbusters, if there's some version of that still exists, or working out, would a subway train be powerful enough to actually rip off a vault door?
I think the thing that would break the most, actually, is the cable connecting the two. I think
Very
that's
possibly,
your point of failure.
I think that's a fair point. But I just imagine this going the other way and the train just basically crashing into this thing once there's no slack, and like just killing lots of innocent people on the subway for no reason. Well, not no reason. They want a goodie from the vault.
It does the Dark Knight truck flip thing, but it's just the subway going straight up into the floor of the hotel.
So I mean, that's the setup, and he goes on the run. So now Mel Gibson's Carmack wants him because he wants what he stole, and we do see out quite early what he stole. It's the coin press that makes the coins that they all use. So I will say that, like, if you haven't seen the John Wick movies, and I imagine most people watching this will have seen them, but if you haven't, I feel like that's one of the little bits of lore that just instantly we get that I think a new viewer might be like, why a coin press? What's going on with the coin press? Who cares?
I think they do a good job, though, of, even if you don't know specifically what it does or why it's important yet, you get that it's important. Everyone says, like, if he gets away with this, everything falls apart immediately.
Yeah. So Mel Gibson's, challenging like his henchmen who have not found him yet. In fact, makes one of them commit suicide, because he actually asks a henchman to shoot the other henchman, and he's like, "Sir, the rules, and he's like, oh yeah, of course, the rules. Yes, we can't have that, can we? Well, how about this? How about, just to ensure your family's safe from me and everyone else that's connected to this, how about you find the nearest balcony and jump off?
Yeah, he's menacing in this. I will give Mel Gibson that. He is very menacing.
Yeah. So he goes splat. Although the splat itself is very CG, so you know it has it's a little bit impaired by that. So, but you know, basically we meet Winston. Young Winston is in England, conning rich people with a scheme about paying for car parks and sleeping with the guy's wife, and it's all fun and games, really.
Yeah. It gives you this idea of like, this guy's going to be involved in this world. We all know that's happening, but he's already borderline criminal. He's already just on the wrong side of the law in terms of, you know, conning these guys and, like you said, sleeping with the guy's wife. That being said, the way they talked, it felt like they had a long-term thing going. Like, it didn't feel like...
Yeah, I was unclear. It kind of sounded like at the very least they've teamed up for this, and this, like I thought I felt this might be the first time they're having sex, so maybe it's not been a long-term thing. But you could convince me either way if you wanted to. But Cormac sends men to go and nab him, so they bring him all the way to New York, and he's like, "Okay, your brother stole a thing. Go find him." And he's like, "I don't know where my brother is. I've not seen him in years." Because one of the things we learn is that when they were kids, his brother took the fall for something he did, and he ended up in prison for a long time, and then he went to Vietnam, and when he came back, they say that he was fine for a while, but he went off the deep end or whatever. Obviously, as we learn more throughout the episode, it's like, no, he clearly fell in love when he was in Vietnam. He got married to a woman who's Vietnamese, and whatever he's doing now, it's not because he's trying to feed some kind of like addiction, which they all think he's doing. There's more of a game plan that we're not quite fully aware of yet.
It is worth noting that the crime they committed in their childhood was apparently against or involving Cormac, and he was the one that essentially ruined their lives because of it. Yeah.
They don't get too specific as to what yet. I'm sure it'll probably come up as we go through. So I'm just sticking with these two and their plot for now, because there's other stuff going on that's worth mentioning. Oh, that said, some of it does intersect. We probably should mention the gun runners.
The trio of B tier.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing about the gun runners. When it first cut to them and they're having this kind of standoff when they're trying to sell their weapons, and they end up having to kill the guys that were buying guns from them. The shot started with pigeons flying by, so instantly in my mind was like, oh, he's going to become Lawrence Fishburne. Now, I could be wrong. It could have just been a stylistic little moment because they wanted to make you think of that. But if we get to the end of episode 3 and he's like, no, I'm going to be the king of the homeless,
I'll give you credit. I'll give you credit for that, because I didn't even think of that.
It felt on the nose to me, even though it doesn't feel like he's acting like him yet. Don't get me wrong, but just that little shot of the pigeons just felt a bit...
Lawrence Fishburne in these movies has a presence. He has a gravitas. This guy does not have that yet.
Well, he has to go through some serious shit before he gets that. But we're interested in them, and they're going to intersect in the main story with Winston and all that. Because Winston ends up going to them. Not right away. He goes to Uncle Charlie first. Now, he was in the movies. He was the guy. He's one of the characters, much like Winston with his... oh, God. It's not an ascot because he corrects the other guy.
Oh, it's like a crevet or something like that?
Yeah. And he's like, F you. How dare you correct that? But he goes to Uncle Charlie, who's got the leather jacket and the hat. This actor I actually recognised. He was in Pulp Fiction, actually, amongst other things from that time. I haven't seen him in a long time, but like I instantly saw, I was like, oh, he's got a familiar face.
As soon as he came up, I was like, did they like digitally de-age Ed Harris but still kept him old? Like, it was so weird because he just has an Ed Harris feel to him.
I was gonna say, hold on, did you think Ed Harris was this character in John Wick?
For like 5 minutes, and I was like, no, that's not him. Like, I'm getting a better look at him at that point. I'm like, okay, no, this is someone else.
No, but I mean in the movies.
Oh, no.
Yeah, okay, because it was David Patrick Kelly who played this character in the movies. I'm like,
no.
I don't remember Ed Harris. No, so he ends up giving him a car, which he's not too happy about because he loves his car. He warns Winston that he better take good care of his car.
See, this is the moment where I first noticed the little poking of reference to the movies. I'm like, he's got to have a car. He's got to have a cool car.
And someone's got to really care about it. Like, it's important to him. This feels thematically like they're sort of poking stuff, which they don't need to. They've already got the Continental and the Assassins, which we'll get to. So it's not like we're not lacking for, connections.
It's just because by the end of this series, we need to understand why Winston has such a kinship with John Wick. And it's because they're practically the same person, I guess.
Yeah. We also, of course, meet young Sharon, who's just started working seemingly for Mel Gibson's character. He's a teenager, but he's still got the suit and tie on. He's still looking quite smart.
Yep, I think he did a great job in that. I could see him being young Lance Reddick.
Yeah, that was totally fine. And then the other main thread, which I'll jump to because it's kind of self-contained, and we can sort of wrap that up before we come back to all the other stuff, which all interconnects. And it does connect slightly in that she's watching the gun runners briefly as surveillance, but we're introduced to the character of KD, who's played by Mishel Prada, who is, we first meet her when she's having sex with another cop that she works with, but she's a detective. She's the first female detective in New York, or at least on their department anyway. So there's a lot of talk about her having to go over the top to prove herself that she's worthy of playing with all the boys, as it were.
Right.
It's just, and I rolled my eyes a little bit at the introduction because I'm like, okay, we're like, this is Peacock trying to be like HBO. We have to have sex in the first episode just because. Sure, whatever. But okay, it introduces the character. She has a little bit of a personality where she's mad at the guy who's like not picking up his dog's shit, and she smears that guy's shit on his window. Like, it gives you a little bit of personality. What I actually quite liked about this plot line, though, once it gets going, is that she's basically traced that someone involved in the gun running, the guy particularly who was going to buy the guns, who got his fingers blown off by the gun runners, goes to the Continental, and she's going to go in. She says to the other cop over the radio, "Hey, I'm at this address. I'm going in," and he comes speeding round the corner and stops her. And he says, "No, you do not go in there." And then kind of implies that none of us go in there. It's off limits. It never really gives her a proper explanation, and I'm not even sure how much he understands why they can't go in. But just that this is a different world. We do not have jurisdiction in there.
Yeah,
and I think
this.
Yeah,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, what I like about this is the idea of a normal detective, for some reason, needing to investigate the Continental, and someone outside that world looking into it, who they shouldn't just kill off because they're an innocent person, but she has reason to go in. And so we get a whole scene where she goes in anyway, and she pays with money for a drink, and the bartender's like, "Money? Paper?
What the hell is cash? What the hell is this doing here?"
I accept special gold coins and nothing else, damn it.
I fully agree. And this is where it really came into the expansion of the lore for me, because I remember back in episode or movie 1 of John Wick, where there's a cop outside his door, and it seemed like the cop just accepted it. It seemed like the cop was knowing of this side of things, and he's just like, "Well, have a good day." And we never got a full answer to that. We never got a full explanation of how do the cops play with actual killers just running around the city.
Yeah, it was one moment in the first movie, then they never really did anything with it in the rest of them. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And that's why I'm so happy to have this here of not only do we get the idea of here's how the cops play with this, and that they understand this is an older order that they could not possibly hope to overtake or overcome, but then secondly, what happens when a normal person just walks into the Continental? Because you're right, they wouldn't just kill them outright. So what happens? And the answer is they basically stonewall them and force them out as soon as possible.
Yeah, they all watch like a hawk. She goes to ask for a room, which it makes sense that she wants to investigate the place, so she's going to stay there. And the concierge is like, "Sorry, we are all booked. There's some other hotels in the area though we can recommend. Please, just leave though. Just go." But I do. So I actually really like this for all the reasons we've been talking about, of a regular person who is somewhat likable based on what we've seen of her so far. I think the actress has at least got some presence, even if they're not giving her a lot in the writing, other than the dog poop and whatnot. and the idea that she's trying to prove herself because she's like the only female detective on the force. That's all fine stuff. But I will critique it though, because, and this is part of what I was saying earlier about this episode having too many things and not maybe having enough time to devote to each one, is that after we get the scene where she tries to go in the first time and the other cop jumps out and says, no, you can't go in there. And, warns her off, but never really gives her a good reason, just says you can't go in.
Mm-hmm.
The next time we see her, it's her walking up to the door and going in. I feel like there should be like something in between there that is like her being motivated to ignore what he said. Instead, it skips that and just goes straight to her already walking back in. It misses a beat. There's something missing between those two scenes for this particular story.
Let me ask, because I genuinely don't remember. I remember there's a sequence where she gets a folder, like a file full of things on Frankie.
Yes.
Was that in between, or was that after?
That's after.
See, that's the linking scene. That should have come beforehand.
Yeah, that came... But I don't know if he wants her to go in, though. So that would imply that he does want her to look into it more. But you're right. It would at least say, oh, what she's read in there's motivated her to go and check it out. Mm. But the file itself, though, is all about Frankie and stuff. So I don't know if it necessarily would.
No, I mean, it would just be different content inside of there that basically says, no, you need to go into this place and check it out because it is going to have the answers you need. But
I think he doesn't want her to go in, though, because I think he's rightly scared because, like, that world is above our pay level. Like, we can't fight the people in there. They're too good. Which I think is partly why he's scared to let her go. So I do think it felt really abrupt to me, like it was missing an important moment for her to make that choice. Instead, we cut to her, and it's like she didn't even struggle with the idea of like trying to like follow her partner or boss's orders, which were very clear. There was nothing like that at all. It was just, no, I'm going straight back in with no dramatic kind of build up to it. That just felt like a bit of a misfire to me in terms of like I liked the content once she went in, but it felt like we were missing a character decision beat there.
I mean, I get that, but I also think that her entire character up to that point she is not someone who really cares for the structure. She's not someone who cares that her partner is saying don't go in or her boss is saying don't go in. She seems like the cop who follows her gut above everything else. So if she feels like she needs to go in there, I have a feeling that her partner saying that wasn't ever something that was stopping her really outside of that moment where he was physically restraining her.
Yeah, I think I feel there's a moment missing there for me in the writing.
Oh yeah, no, I get that.
It felt too abrupt for her to just be already going back in with another scene with her just doing something that would inspire that choice, or at least tell us that she is already thinking about it and is already like, no, I'm not going to listen to him. I'm going to go in no matter what. But it is interesting though to think like what this might lead to. Might this lead to the idea that more of the police do become aware? Like, does she become like a liaison, assuming she doesn't die?
Right, that's the thing.
Which is possible.
Where we see, that's the thing, is like from her storyline, if this played out without us knowing how things end up, you would think that it would end up with her exposing the Continental or her like taking it apart or something like that. But we know that can't be the end game. So it is up in the air of how does her plot end up in this situation? And my guess is that it's going to come down to like, she hates the idea of it, but she recognizes that it's like a necessary evil in the world or something like that.
Yeah, maybe she'll end up having to help Winston, and Winston, because he's not a complete evil scumbag like Cormac seems to be, it'll be like, oh, he can be like a helping hand in the shadows kind of thing.
I mean, if I had to put money on it right now, I would say Cormac gets excommunicadoed for whatever reason, and then because he has no protection, she is able to arrest him and send him to jail. That's my guess.
And I wouldn't surprise me if Winston even helps with that, like, or something. I don't know. I'm just... So, I do appreciate this plot line. I just wish it got a little bit more time in the episode. But, but it is interesting because it kind of, like, when it kicks in, it's like an introduction, which is the scene, it's the sex scene, and then the conversation after, and then that leads straight into her surveying the other place, and the gun runners leaving the building with her camera, which leads... So, like, everything we've described that she does in this episode, almost, like, I would say, like, more than half of it takes place in one chunk with no interruptions. It's all bundled together. And then it's only when she goes back in later and in that little scene of her finding the folder that the other cops left for her that are separate, and maybe divvy those up a bit more evenly or something. I don't know, but the pacing was definitely feeling a bit weird, because at that point I felt like, oh, we were gone from Winston for a long time, and the all that stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that the biggest problem with the pacing of the first episode is the gunrunners themselves, because we have to spend a very long time explaining each of their, not even each, but their group's dynamic, and then why they're doing what they're doing. And we get like a whole thing of, it's a brother-sister duo, and they're trying to keep their dad's dojo afloat, and that's why they're selling guns. And it felt very extraneous as of this point. It felt like it wasn't really necessary to find out, like, oh, why do we need all of this for them right now?
I also felt like, so Winston goes to them after he's been to see Uncle Charlie, because he got that address from him or whatever, but he asks about the brother, and they're very on edge when he brings up Frankie. They have him at gunpoint for a while. The sister wants nothing to do with them because Frankie's upset her. Maybe she was an ex of his or something. We don't really quite know. But eventually Miles, the brother, starts to talk to him and takes him downstairs into their armory, because they're gun runners, so they have this room that's just filled with guns all over the place. And they get to talking, and they talk about how, oh no, Frankie was turning his life around. He met a woman, things were going okay, and he started working for the Continental, but then things took a bit of a turn, and ultimately gives him a place that he might be at, so he goes. But at the end of the scene, Winston's like, hey, can I, like, you know, take my gun back? Is that okay? And he's like, yeah, you're good. And then he sort of like walks over with a big assault rifle and says, and you better take this too. And I'm like, I don't feel like I believe you like him or trust him enough to just hand him one of your guns for free. It feels a bit weird to me. I don't know.
I mean, if it's the one thing that he ended the scene with, I think this is here, is he basically says, I'm looking for Frankie and I need all the help I can get. And I feel like they, as we see in the end of the episode, there was some level of a plan set up here of what they intended to do once they got Frankie back. And it's because the one guy is able to fly a helicopter, which, sure, yeah, I think you can take helicopters off from the slums of New York City. That seems totally reasonable to me, but...
I mean, they were all in Nam together, so I just assume he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, so...
I'm not worried about the skills. I'm worried about parking a helicopter in the slums of New York. That seems like the weird part.
The franchise has done sillier things, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
But yeah, he goes to this like abandoned theater, which is where Frankie is, but there's like a trap waiting, and like Frankie's wife, who doesn't speak any English, is about to kill him when Frankie comes out. He's like, wait, is that my brother? Hey, Missy, stop. By the way, I never mentioned this, but I've got a little brother. And it does that thing. It keeps the subtitle thing from the movies where like they emphasize certain words and it's a little bit stylized, which, you know, simple thing to keep, but it was the right choice for sure. For sure. So yeah, they sort of reconcile a bit and talk about like what's going on. You know, like honestly, like this scene and then the scene where they go to Charlie's afterwards and then they get ambushed because one of Charlie's friends like sells them out. Like all of this stuff is where I really felt the pacing kind of tanked to me, because it was a lot of talking about their past, but it wasn't really. It was intentionally kind of skirting around the details that it wants to keep secret for now. So it kind of felt like, okay, we're going to have them like go through these motions that they have to go through because they're reunited after like 20 years or whatever. But we're not actually going to have them have too many big dramatic moments yet because it's too soon for that. Obviously, they're not planning to have those big dramatic moments with Frankie because Frankie's dead at the end of the episode.
Yeah. Frankie
went to Hollywood, you might say.
I wouldn't, but you can say that, sure.
But I don't know. I did feel like all of their like brothers' heart. Like this is the thing. Winston was all right on his own, and Frankie's action scene at the start because he's the one who gets the John Wick action scene, which is why I was kind of surprised they killed him off at the end because I thought, wait, but he's the one who could fight like John Wick. So what? Why are we getting rid of him? That seems like a poor choice.
That opening scene set up a lot of expectations.
Yes.
I mean, I do want to throw in around this point, when I think they're actually driving away from Charlie's, is I think the most frustrating scene. It's already long, it's already been going on for a while, so I get kind of why they did it, but they did this thing during the chase scene where they just chose to not show us anything. They just chose to basically press the skip ahead 30 seconds button about 7 times until finally we arrive at the place we need to be. And that was so frustrating to me because it felt like there could have been a really cool chase scene with all these guns and they're like driving people off the road. And in the end, all we got were like short little 5-second snippets. And then they're like, okay, we're here.
Yeah, I don't like to judge action movies based on number of like proper action scenes because it's a very kind of like idiotic and like rudimentary way of like gauging is it good, right? Because that it doesn't translate to quality. You can have a lot of action scenes and be shit. But it did occur to me, though, once we were about an hour or so in, and that's roughly where we are around this point in the episode, that we had the big action scene at the start where he's going down the stairs and he's doing all the John Wick style gun scenes, but I was thinking, you know what, we've not really had any action scenes that weren't over in the span of like 10 seconds since then. And I'm thinking back to the movies, and I'm like, well, you know, the movies were really good at having them kind of consistently come in. 3 had a bit of a problem with having that big downer in the middle, but for the most part, they were quite good at that. And I was thinking, man, it really feels like, okay, they did a good job of doing a lower budget version of a John Wick fight at the start of this episode. But at this point in the episode, I was thinking, oh, I'm a little worried that they can only afford to do that maybe once per episode, and that, you know, we're going to be spending all this time just having, let's face it, not amazing dialogue, right? The conversations are okay, but they're not like, this isn't, we just recorded a review for Social Network with Aaron Sorkin dialogue. This is not Aaron Sorkin dialogue. This is a lot more just serviceable stuff.
Oh yeah,
that's coming out of their mouths.
I mean, if I had to guess just based off economy of scale here, I think that the first episode has 1 or 2 to keep your attention. The second episode will probably have 1 really stylistically well done one just to keep you going, but then the third one's where the entire budget is sunk into, and they have essentially the siege on the Continental.
Oh, you would hope, you'd hope that they have a lot of big stuff planned for the third episode. I don't like judging something this way, but I started to feel that like almost I could see the constraints of the budget and like them just like saving money by having just these scenes in a trailer with them talking to each other. And you know, when I think of the John Wick movies, even when they were just standing around talking to each other, it looked a bit more flashy, whereas this does just feel like a TV show at times where they're just sitting there having a conversation, you know?
I think it was the 4th movie, I could be wrong, but there's a part where they have a totally normal conversation with John Wick. It's whatever characters it is. Meanwhile, he is strung up by his neck and is being strangled to death as they're having this normal conversation. There's no such thing as just 2 people talking in John Wick. Something has to be going on under the surface.
Yeah, and even when it was like John Wick talking to Winston, they'd be in like a really flashy location. Like they'd, you know, they're at like a monument or something. You get a lot of nice big wide shots and all the rest of it. And, you know, a lot of the wide shots in this are hampered a little bit by, oh, that's clearly some CG in the background to make it look like the 70s and stuff like that. So, you know, like, obviously I'm picking nits a little bit here at just like the concessions it has to make to be a direct-to-streaming TV show. But I guess it does raise the question of, like, are there some things that just shouldn't be a TV show because the entire appeal of them is the flashy, stylistic action? And if you can't actually do that reliably, then, you know, like...
No, I agree. I think, here's the thing. I think what you said at the very beginning is where their very first misstep was. They should have made this a bunch of shorter episodes, but like more episodes. As soon as you make them this feature length, you are automatically going to be comparing them to the movies themselves. You don't give it the benefit of the doubt of saying like, oh, well, they only have 45 minutes to work in, or, oh, they have like 8 episodes to stretch it out over. As soon as you make it 3 and then length of movies, it's now a movie. It's now basically a cinema experience. And with the TV budget, it really starts to show.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have any personality. Basically, when they realize that their team have failed to capture the brothers, Mel Gibson turns and says, okay, let's go to an outside source. What guests do we have at the hotel? And I sort of smiled because, like, okay, this is using your premise wisely because, you've got an assassin that's full, or you've got a hotel, that's full of assassins. So it's like, okay, go get the weird ones. And then there's even a nice little joke here where he says, actually, yeah, you're right, they're all weird. The twins, get the twins. So we're introduced to these twins who don't speak, and it's a brother-sister set of twins, and they look, kind of creepy. They've got a creepy vibe.
To describe this to the audience, like, the girl's got like a bob cut. She's weird looking, minimally. The dude is Lord Farquaad. The dude has like a 17th century colonial boy haircut, and it's like the funniest looking thing. But yeah, he's creepy because they don't ever talk or anything like that. But
yeah, and they just sort of like they'll just stare, but then they'll look at each other and then start staring again, and they've got this vibe.
Their names are Hansel and Gretel.
That's right. Yeah, very good, very good. This is the sort of personality that I'm here for. I'm here for more colorful assassins that have got more going for them.
Absolutely. In that vein, earlier on in the story that was completely disconnected from anything else. So we had Frankie was actually teamed up with a guy in order to rob the vault, and then he just left that guy behind.
Oh, Jordan.
Once the job was going through.
Well, he tried to. Well, the guy betrayed him, right? Because when they get into the vault, this other guy that he's working with, this English guy who works at the Continental, and I did like that actually. In terms of moments of filmmaking, I actually really like. There's a shot when they're basically waiting for the subway, and there's a bunch of like partying New Year people behind them waiting for the subway. They're all partying in the background, and Frankie's center frame just sort of staring dead ahead, very serious. I did notice during that shot, which lasts a good 15 seconds, that there was a second guy staring just like he was in the same direction, and I went, wait a minute, is he like here to kill him, or is he here to work with him? But it made me notice that there was a second person there now, and I thought, as far as the filmmaking goes, I thought this was one of the more impressive little moments of the whole thing, because it made me pay attention to a detail. And then it was like, okay, yeah, they are working together, and then the scene progressed. But yeah, so the guy betrays him after they open the vault. Frankie fights his way out, of course, which leads to what I think you're about to bring up, is this guy is being interrogated by this person that hired him, which I know from IMDb that this woman's credited as, was it an adjudicator?
Yep. Which is a character that we were introduced to in John Wick 3.
Well, it's not the same character, though. This will be a different one.
It's the concept of the adjudicator,
concept,
but it's probably someone else taking the role.
Yeah, she's wearing like a creepy like mask in the bottom half of her face, like a porcelain mask, but only for the bottom half of her face. This is actually Lena Luthor from Supergirl playing this role.
Oh yeah, I knew I recognized her somehow.
And she's got a henchman who is a crazy, psychotic Scottish man.
Yep.
Because I noticed like halfway through the scene he was wearing a kilt, and then I was like, oh, is he actually Scottish? And then he said one line, I'm like, oh yeah, he's Scottish. And then he starts beating the shit out of this guy to death and seemingly enjoying it. He seems to be quite into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I saw a trivia thing. I'm not sure where it was, but it was a the fact that he was wearing a kilt was a very direct reference to some other movie.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find it real quick. The Adjudicator's kilt-wearing henchman is an obvious tribute to Roy Batty, character made famous by Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner.
Well, I don't think the kilt's related to that, but well, I don't remember him wearing a kilt in Blade Runner, but
I don't know. But he says it's an obvious tribute, which...
I mean, I'm not getting the obvious part of it, but okay. he's got like blonde hair, I suppose. That's like Rutger Hauer in that movie.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, this was actually, well, I appreciate the cartooniness of both her and her henchman, right? I enjoyed that part of it. This was one of the moments, because this is like over halfway in, where I went, are we still introducing new like characters and like plot threads to keep track of? Now we have this villainous force, but separate from Mel Gibson's whole thing, and this is probably the character that might end up coming in and killing Mel Gibson if they're not happy with him, because these are the ones who run the table and all that shit.
I was going to say, if I remember correctly, the Adjudicator is basically the person who, because Mel Gibson has lost this coin press, she's probably going to come in and say, okay, you've lost your authority or whatever because you've let this happen. Because that's the same sort of thing she did in John Wick 3.
Which is interesting, though, if she hired this guy, because it means that there's a conspiracy against Mel Gibson's character.
Entirely possible. He's not a likable man.
No, he's not. He's not particularly likable.
And the character's not great either.
I knew that was the joke that was coming next. I could see it coming. So yeah, the end of the episode. So probably the second more impressive fight in this is actually the wife, Yen, Frankie's wife, who fights one of the guys chasing them in like a kitchen or in like an apartment that ends up in the kitchen, which she ends up putting the guy's hand in the garbage disposal and then stabbing him in the back of the head with an iron. Yes, as in an iron your clothes iron. She stabs someone in the back of the neck with that.
It's brutal. It's a very brutal scene.
Which, honestly, similar to what I was saying earlier, where I was surprised they killed off Frankie, given he's the one who could fight like John Wick. Towards the end, right, when they're getting on the helicopter and she gets shot, I actually leaned up and went, she is like the coolest fighter in this whole episode. You can't kill her off, you idiots. And then they killed off Frankie, and I was like, well... okay, the two people with the best action scenes in the episode, you had to kill one of them off? Like, really? Like, come on now.
Well, we weren't killing off Winston, so...
Yeah, do you know what's so weird about the Winston thing, though? I feel like it's building up to, like, him, like, learning or, like, relearning to fight, and I'm like... In the movies, they very much point out that even when the Continental's under siege, he's like just like sitting back with a drink, like sending out John and Sharon to deal with it.
I was gonna say the way I picked him up in the movies is that he feels like he's always got a strategy. He always has like a way out. So I'd actually be interested in seeing if, I mean, obviously with how this episode ends, it seems like it's leaning more into the fighter sort of aspect. But I'd like to see if the way his character is actually developed is more of he lays out this master plan that ends up catching Cormac off guard.
I hope he feels like he's schemed by the end of this, and not just he's fighting as good as John Wick did when he was in his prime. Because that even you can tell me that he was better at it when he was younger, but it feels wrong to me to be like, no, when he was like in his 30s, he was fighting just like John Wick. I don't know, that feels a bit weird to me.
That was never his character in the movies.
But yeah, so the end of the episode, after his brother like willingly sacrifices himself because, hey, they want me, they want this press, he jumps out of the helicopter, he tells his wife he loves her, and lets himself be killed. Which, by the way, the shot of him standing on the rooftop waiting for this bullet is one of the worst shots of the whole episode, because it's such an obvious stage with a green screen behind it.
Yeah. I felt that way. The whole helicopter setup, I felt like that, because it's so clearly green screened in.
I think it stuck out to me more than that shot, though, because it's like a dramatic moment where they're lingering on it. You know, it's not all the, we're running around and we're doing tension. This was, no. We're having this angelic almost moment of him waiting for his like sacrifice. And I'm like, yeah, but it looks kind of bad.
Yeah.
So
they were hoping you wouldn't notice through Peacock's compression. They were like, oh no, it was totally hidden.
Oh dear, that was a legit tactic back in the SD days, where like, oh, we can get away with the set not being that good because the fuzziness of standard definition will mean no one sees it. And then we switched to HD, and all of a sudden, especially all the soaps that have like an episode like every day, we're like, oh shit, we have to like redo all our sets so that people don't notice how shit they look. But anyway, so the end of the episode is Winston with his sister-in-law, effectively. You know, he's carrying her. You know, he's got her arm over his shoulder, and they limp up to the dojo where the gunrunners are. They open the door and like, hey, what the hell happened to you? And the end of the episode is Winston saying, I need guns, lots of guns. And then it goes to credits, and I groaned so hard. So this is like a layered problem with this, right?
Yeah.
One is that super prequel thing where we're going to have him reference a line that it's not even him that says it in the later movies, which would at least make some sense that, oh, this is something he said in the past, so he says it again. This was something John Wick said in John Wick 3. But the second problem that I have with this, it was a cute reference in John Wick 3 when Keanu said it, but here's the thing, that was a cute reference to another franchise.
Yeah.
This feels like you're co-opting another franchise's line to be a running thing in your franchise, and that feels kind of lame to me. I don't know.
No, I get it. I understand what you're saying there, because obviously it started with Matrix, and the only reason it really worked is because it was Keanu.
Yeah.
But I would argue that that line is now just as much John Wick's as it is Matrix. I would argue that. I'm not that beholden to it, but I would argue it.
I can't agree with that.
Well, run with me here. Because it is just as much John Wick's, I can at least appreciate the fact of them saying it, because it's not like it came out of nowhere. It's not like he's like, oh yeah, I'm going down to the grocery store, I need guns. Like, it works for the moment that they built up in the show. I get where the groan comes from, though, because clearly they're just trying to be cute about it. It just didn't feel ham-fisted to me, I guess.
I know, I feel ham-fisted to me. That's
All right.
like, even if you can justify it and say it still works in context, which it kind of does, because yeah, I get why he says it in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. What the line is attached to brings with it all this weight, and that weight sinks the moment because it just doesn't feel justified for him to actually say it in a meta level. So as a result, I hated that final line, and it left me off in a really bad taste. Like, I think it's a kind of mixed episode overall. There's moments I do enjoy. There's moments where the expansion of the lore. But what's so funny to me is I feel like doing the origin of Winston in the Continental is almost like the least interesting part of this to me. I feel like a regular cop investigating the Continental, which is somewhat separate, feels more interesting because it's more unique and separate, whereas Winston and how he takes control of the Continental by the end of the show feels like just like the obvious like fan fiction prequel idea. It's like, oh, we're going to just do the story of how Winston became the leader of the Continental. And it's like, yeah, that's okay, but like that's what you would suggest for a prequel, so that's less interesting to me.
Yeah, I get that. I if it does focus more on the cop anymore, I think again that's where I got most of my enjoyment out of it with the lore expansion. It was from this cop. So if they focus on that more, I'm all in for it. That being said, while I'm not as interested in specifically here's how Winston came to be a part of the Continental, I am interested in the idea of the entirety of the cast, if that makes sense. Like, I want to see how Sharon got to where he did as well. I'd like, not in so much as I care to see the beat for beat of here's how it happened. I just want to I want to know how it happened, I guess. I want to be able to read the wiki page once this is done and say, oh, okay, cool. That's how that happened.
I mean, clearly, like, he's going to just sort of, like, bond with Winston and accept the role as being his, like, main man at once Cormac's out of the picture. Yeah, I just like that's the ultra prequel stuff to me, is just to like not everything needs a backstory in the same way that you don't have to tell the backstory of how Anakin became Darth Vader. I don't need the backstory of how Winston became the leader of the Continental. That's the status quo that we start with. To me, the interesting stuff here, as we've been talking about, is this other character who's a normal person in the normal world having a reason to be curious about this place and maybe discovering that world. That's far more intriguing to me than anything like, hey, this is how Winston gets his car, or this is how Winston like gets his thing.
Let me throw this to you though, because in the context of this story, Winston is a normal guy. He doesn't know anything about the assassin world going into this, as far as we're aware. He knows Cormac and them run this like shadowy business thing, but remember, his brother has to break him down and say, like, they are bigger than you could possibly imagine. And he kind of gives him the very brief rundown of their killers and they're older than you can even realize, sort of thing. So in that way, he is this person off the street. It's just that he has already had business with Cormac before this.
Yeah, the two things I would say there is that, one, that doesn't really matter in the sense that we know he's going to be a part of it, so it's still prequel for that reason. And two, he's still connected enough and is doing enough sort of conning that he still feels like he fits. Like, he already feels like he's pre-made to fit into that world to an extent. Whereas the other character of KD is like, no, you live in the normal world and you have nothing to do with this, and your story could be anything from here on forward, and that's maybe why that's a little bit more interesting to me. Yeah. So
I'll give you that. I think that the best way they could have changed this is that they had no exposure to Cormac at all prior to this particular thing. He's pulled into this guy's office. He has no idea who he is. And he's like, hey, I'm looking for your brother. Tell me where he is. And that's his first exposure to any of it. I think that's better.
But that's not perfect. That's not what we're doing, though. He has a history with Cormac. So,
yeah.
Like, yeah. So I mean, all kind of comes down to is I think prequels 9 times out of 10 are a bad idea and don't enhance the original work or stand on their own. Better Call Saul is the shining exception to that rule, but typically prequels in almost any form never really work for me because they are just too connected to the thing. Also, but just before we wrap up, we should probably mention that they dupe them. So when Frankie dies with the box that has the printing press in it, when Mel Gibson gets it and opens it, it's the little statue with the middle finger up. So presumably, Winston and co still have that, or someone has it at least. Maybe Charlie has it. It's hidden somewhere. Who knows?
I mean, it's going to end up in Winston's hands regardless, so we could just say he has it.
Yeah. So, yeah. It was okay. I mean, I did feel the pacing. I did feel like you could have condensed this down probably, even though I think there's parts of it that should have been expanded. Given what's there, I do think you could have tightened it up to probably about 60 minutes without really losing much of anything.
Yeah, I mean, again, my biggest pet peeve out of that is we missed an entire action scene with that car driving thing. And I know you're saying that, don't judge it by number of action scenes, but it felt to me like if you're not going to show it, don't tease it.
Well, there could be reasons to tease it that are valid, but I think what I was saying before, though, is that while I don't think you should just judge something based on number of action scenes, when you're watching something that's known as an action franchise, and I think we're both saying we were feeling it at a certain point in this episode that, it's been a while since they've done anything. It feels like they're having to hold back because they just can't. And when you start to feel those limitations, it makes it feel like, I don't know what the right word to even describe this is, but there's a feeling you get when you're watching something that just can't do the things you want it to do, at least not consistently. And that can be okay if the actual drama and the writing elsewhere is so strong that it doesn't matter because you're so engaged into the story. I don't think this does that, though. I don't think I'm so into the drama of the brothers and the revenge against Carmack and all this stuff that I don't care that there's no action. No. Like, I go to John Wick for action, and here there's a couple of good action sequences, but they are fewer than further between. So I'm very curious to see how it plays out in episode 2 and 3.
Same. Yeah.
So, but it's only 3 episodes, so we'll do all 3. We'll be back next week with episode 2. So.
I paid for a month of Peacock. I'm getting its money worth.
Yes. So that is what the plan is. So hopefully you've enjoyed our thoughts on the Continental episode 1. We'll be back next week with episode 2. Let us know what you thought of this one in the comments. And of course you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses. I've started reviewing Columbo on a monthly basis as a Patreon exclusive, so you can check out that. And of course go check out the movie podcast that me and David do over MailFuzz Movies or on podcast feed, which is the Collector's Cut, where we work through franchises, we work through director filmographies, actor filmographies, things like that. We're currently doing, unfortunately, the Expendables movies, with Expendables 4 coming up next, so that's the thing. But we're going to David Fincher season after that, so there'll be a lot of David Fincher movies coming up. So yeah, go check out all that. But that is the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?